This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Friday, June 26th. This is Africa 54. Due to the global outbreak of COVID-19, Voice of America is taking every necessary precaution to safeguard its employees. So our broadcast will look a little different today and in the near future as we, out of an abundance of caution, reduce our staffing at VOA headquarters here in Washington. We're working to help keep you informed about what's going on, and we appreciate you staying with us on Africa 54. We begin our broadcast in southeastern Africa, where Malawi opposition leader Lazarus Chakwera appears to be headed toward a victory in the nation's rerun presidential election, with 60% of the vote, according to an unofficial tally by state broadcaster Malawi Broadcasting Corporation. However, the Electoral Commission told journalists that it will take up to 2 more days to announce the official results. The Malawi Broadcasting Corporation says the tally was from 25 of 28 districts counted, giving President Peter Mutharika 39% of votes. A win for Chakwera would be a dramatic reversal of last year's discredited result, handing the presidency back to Mutharika, who has been in power since 2014. Tuesday's vote is being regarded as a test of the ability of African courts to fight ballot fraud, not uncommon on the continent, since Malawi's judiciary angered Mutharika in February by repealing the result of the 2019 vote. As COVID-19 cases in the United States skyrocket to near record highs, the U.S. Coronavirus Task Force, led by Vice President Mike Pence, is slated to hold its first public briefing Friday in nearly 2 months. U.S. states reported over 39,000 new cases Thursday, according to the Washington Post. That's the highest one-day total since the outbreak began in December. The U.S. leads the world in COVID-19 infections with over 2.4 million cases, followed by Brazil with 1.2 million cases and Russia with more than 613,000 infections, according to Johns Hopkins University. Now to Africa, where the World Bank says Nigeria's COVID-19 outbreak may impoverish up to 5 million people as it triggers the worst recession in the West African nation since the 1980s. The combination of the coronavirus pandemic and a global oil price crash is currently hammering Nigeria, which has Africa's largest economy, mainly because it's the continent's top crude producer. The World Bank's outlook for Nigeria is bleak. It forecasts that Nigeria's economy will plummet between 3.2 and 7.4% this year, depending on the severity of the COVID-19 outbreak. In a worst-case scenario, the recession could continue into 2021, when the economy could contract 2%, according to the World Bank. Tanzania's move to reopen the country for tourism after President John Magufuli declared the country free of COVID-19 has been welcomed by many in the industry, even though the sector has been struggling during the pandemic. Some tour operators worry that Tanzania's lack of candor on the extent of infections in the country will keep foreign tourists away. Charles Kambe reports from Morogoro, Tanzania.
Tanzania's Mikumi National Park last year attracted around 50,000 tourists, around 40% of them foreigners. The coronavirus pandemic brought foreign tourism to halt in March when international flights and parks were closed. The park is seeing visitors slowly return after the government in May allowed flights and tourism to resume, but they are mainly locals.
We came to Mikumi to come and refresh from the quarantine that we were before from the coronavirus, just to have a bit of fresh air. So we came here for the weekend, me and my fellow riders, as you can see.
President John Magufuli in May declared Tanzania had defeated the virus, a claim that health experts and its neighbors dismiss. Kenya has since tested dozens of Tanzanian truckers as its border positive for COVID-19, while Tanzania has refused to release coronavirus infection figures since April. Nonetheless, Tanzanian authorities say this is the right time to open up for tourists.
In Tanzania, to the contrary, the number of cases and the hospitalizations, deaths has completely gone down. over the past few weeks. And it's the right timing as well, because we've put in place all the necessary measures for prevention and control of the spread of COVID-19 in the country.
But not everyone in Tanzania's tourism industry is following the herd. Some say the government's lack of honesty with the coronavirus infection numbers could keep visitors away.
There are worries because customers that we depend on are those from outside the country. As you know, our domestic tourism does not go that far to benefit those of us who are working in the tourism sector.
Tanzania's tourism trade makes up more than 70% of the country's gross domestic product. While opening to tourists could help lessen economic damage, how Tanzania handles the pandemic could have a much longer-term effect. Charles Kombe for VOA News, Morogoro, Tanzania.
The U.S. Department of Energy's Argonne National Laboratory is known historically as an important nuclear research center. But as VOA's Ken Parabao reports, a critical present-day mission at the suburban Chicago facility is using some of the world's most sophisticated technology to combat COVID-19.
It takes a big building to house a mighty machine like the Advanced Photon Source, or APS, which gives researchers at Argonne National Laboratory a microscopic view of the front line of the war against COVID-19.
The APS is, you can think of it as a X-ray microscope. What we do is we produce extremely bright X-rays with a central facility that then is fed to a number of different X-ray beam lines where our researchers actually do their work.
The goal is to aid the scientific community's frantic scramble for an effective COVID-19 vaccine and drugs to treat those who contract it. To do so, Stephen Streifer and a team of hundreds are using the APS to decode COVID-19 proteins.
Those proteins are what makes the virus function. And if we can interrupt the function of those proteins, then we can create drugs that can treat the infection.
Streifer says the work at Argonne is pre-competitive. What they find is available to the broad medical community working to create a vaccine and other drugs.
We're interfacing with both a number of pharmaceutical companies, but also the broader research community. So this information is open to all.
The APS is one weapon in Argonne's arsenal in the pandemic battle. Another is one of the most powerful supercomputers in the world, Theta.
What we can do with the supercomputers is we can screen 4 billion drug compounds to see if they have any effect on the virus, and do that in a matter of weeks. To do that without the supercomputers would literally take you years.
While Theta is running those calculations, computer modelers are also using the machine to anticipate the spread of COVID-19.
So for the city of Chicago, what our modelers have done is essentially created a computer simulation with individual entities in that computer simulation that represent individual people in Chicago. Just representations, not real people, not real attributes.
Where, for a given set of assumptions, we project what the future would be for the progression of COVID-19.
Charles Makel, a senior systems engineer, says the detailed information Theta provides underscores the importance of simple but highly effective things everyone can do to curb the spread of the virus.
The single most important thing that we've identified is the importance of people to adhere to protective behaviors. Things like wearing masks, social distancing, washing hands.
Argonne's Stephen Streifer says research conducted at the facility has helped guide decision makers in Illinois over when to impose restrictions and how to safely reopen the state's economy.
So we're providing information directly to the governor's task force. We're also working very closely with the city of Chicago as one of our major partners so that they're using that information to develop policies that we hope will help and get us back to a state where we're doing the right things to keep people safe, but doing it in a way which is minimally disruptive to the economy.
While currently focused on Illinois, Argonne is developing the capability to apply the model to other cities and regions, including those currently seeing dramatic increases in the number of new COVID-19 cases. Kane Fairbaugh, VOA News, Chicago, Illinois.
Germany is reimposing COVID-19 lockdown measures in 2 districts in the country's west, affecting hundreds of thousands of people following an outbreak at a meat plant. It's the latest in a series of outbreaks at meat processing factories around the world. The outbreaks are raising fears in Europe that the easing of restrictive measures could trigger a second wave of the coronavirus pandemic. Henry Ridgewell has more from London.
Scenes that many governments in Europe dread, a sudden outbreak of coronavirus infections and a return to lockdown. The spike has seen hundreds of workers from the Turney's meat processing plant in the western German town of Reda-Wiedenbrück test positive for the virus in the past week. State authorities imposed localized restrictions on movement Tuesday in 2 districts, just weeks after Germany emerged from its nationwide lockdown.
The purpose is to calm the situation, to extend the test now, and to determine whether or not the virus has already spread in the population beyond the Tönnies employees.
Residents expressed dismay at the return of the lockdown.
We all have to isolate a little bit, but I think from a rational point of view, it's right. But I believe it's actually really terrible for everyone again, just as we had achieved a little more freedom.
The outbreak in Germany follows similar flare-ups at meat processing plants in Britain, the United States, France and Spain. Experts say the conditions at such plants aid virus transmission.
Meat is cooled there to keep it cool, and this temperature can play a role. Another factor, which we do not underestimate either, is that aerosols are also formed there.
Meanwhile, Britain announced a further easing of lockdown measures Tuesday, with pubs, restaurants and movie theatres allowed to reopen from July 4th. But such relaxations come with dangers.
80 to 90% people are still uninfected and they don't have antibodies that can protect against the reinfection or the infection in the first instance. So this means any change in the social behavior would make these people more susceptible to contract the infection. And if this transmission pattern would go on the way it's been going in February, March, we would be seeing a second wave.
The possibility of a second wave and a second lockdown overshadows the relief as Britain's lockdown is eased.
At some point it's going to come back again, just like a flu, a cold or something like that. I wouldn't like to be on the position of those leaders who have to make that decision, to be honest.
For now, German authorities say the outbreak in Reda-Wiedenbrück is localized and contained. Any large-scale second wave of infections would pose a major challenge to Europe's already devastated economies. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
The coronavirus pandemic is forcing businesses to reevaluate the way they operate as well as see some of the specialists in a new light. Daria De Goods asked experts to talk about what the future job market might look like.
Layoffs, cut hours, unpaid leave, and unknown job prospects. Since the coronavirus pandemic hit the U.S., over 40 million of Americans have filed unemployment claims. But some benefited from the crisis. Already in mid-March, the largest online retailer, Amazon, announced its plans to hire an additional 100,000 people. A lot of other places are looking for delivery drivers, and grocery stores are in constant need of employees.
We have gone to a mode where we're all shopping online, we're buying online, and I think that's probably going to continue. I don't think people are going to be anxious to get out to the stores anytime soon, and they've learned the convenience of it. So I think e-commerce is really going to continue to grow, and that means more jobs in that industry.
Experts say after the pandemic is over, the demand for medical workers will also rise dramatically, as more and more private companies want to have an in-house doctor, and some are even forming medical departments. Rise in demand is also predicted for cleaning services. The rising volume of online transactions and work from home will lead to the need for more IT and high-tech specialists. According to Paul McDonald, Senior Executive Director of a large management consulting company, Robert Half, such skills as coding, data analysis, as well as knowledge in the sphere of e-commerce and banking will become increasingly sought after.
Technical support that goes along with that in those remote workforce as well. So remote technical support, as I mentioned, data privacy and security, highly valued. Business continuity experts in the tech arena. So that's technology. In the banking world, we've seen the demand for mortgage processors just pick up during this pandemic. Rates are still low, therefore mortgage refinancing is still very active. We've also seen loan processors be very much in demand.
The pandemic-imposed work routine will also affect the post-COVID job market. According to the research by the Gallup Management Consulting Company, about 60% of Americans worked at home during the pandemic, and over half of them would like to do it after the pandemic is over.
New avenues for people who need that type of flexibility. So people with young children, people with disabilities or chronic illness, these type of folks who have been trying to get flexible work space for a long, long time and have kind of run up against a wall and employers resisting that. And now suddenly in the face of a pandemic, we suddenly realize, oh, well, maybe we can do it.
Remote work can be beneficial not only to employees, but also to the employers, say experts. In that case, the job market will soon enter a true globalization phase.
If you have a remote workforce, it creates an opportunity for you to recruit people wherever they may be. You're not bound by geography. You may be based in New York City and you could have workers in Kansas City that are working for you.
The whole idea of corporate culture will go through a lot of change after the pandemic. For millions of people around the world, a few months merged the idea of an office, classroom, and home in one. And for many, it might just stay that way. For Dati Goods in Washington, Anna Rice, VOA News.
We'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Linor Moudou, your VOA health correspondent.
Let us be perfectly clear. All countries.
During the COVID-19 pandemic, the World Health Organization says there is no information or evidence suggesting that the coronavirus can be transmitted by mosquitoes.
There are 2 published studies.
It is a respiratory virus which spreads primarily through droplets, generated when an infected person coughs or sneezes, or through droplets of saliva or discharge from the nose.
This happened during pandemics in the past.
For more information on COVID-19, visit who.int or contact your local or national health authorities.
Welcome back to Africa 54. The United Nations marks the 75th anniversary of its founding on Friday in a much different world than it was born into. VOA UN correspondent Margaret Bishia looks at how the organization has matured and the challenges it faces going forward.
Now my duty, my honor and my privilege in the chair to call for a vote on the approval of the Charter of the United Nations.
It was June 1945 in San Francisco, California, that the UN Charter was signed. Created to prevent a repeat of the atrocities of World War II, the United Nations was designed as a framework to peacefully resolve international disputes. The organization marks its 75th anniversary in a much different world, one gripped by global upheaval, says UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
From COVID-19 to climate disruption, from racial injustice to rising inequalities, we are a world in turmoil. At the same time, we have an international community with an enduring vision embodied in the Charter to guide us to a better future. Our shared challenge is to rise to this moment.
But several of the UN's major founding powers, Britain, China, Russia, and the United States, are moving further away from one of its core principles, multilateralism. This as smaller countries are embracing it.
We really see this move towards investing the UN with even more importance because these countries collectively acknowledge that many of the problems of our day cannot be solved except by multilateral diplomacy. Right? Things like climate change, things like global health, as we see too clearly today, can only be solved through international cooperation.
The UN chief acknowledges that today's multilateralism needs to be more robust.
The problem is not that multilateralism is not up to the challenges the world faces. The problem is that today's multilateralism lacks scale, ambition, and teeth.
Over the years, the UN has expanded its work to include peacekeeping and humanitarian operations. Today, the organization feeds 87 million people in 83 countries, vaccinates half the world's children, and has nearly 100,000 peacekeepers deployed in 13 countries. While preventing another world war, the UN has struggled to curb conflicts in nearly every corner of the globe, making the body ineffectual, say critics.
The UN isn't what it was conceived to be in 1945. It's been largely ineffective in its political arms. Many of its humanitarian agencies do very good work, but on the political side, it has not functioned as it was expected to.
The UN is marking its anniversary during the COVID-19 pandemic, a disease that poses perhaps its single greatest challenge since its founding. But before the virus, the UN was already facing a long to-do list.
I think the overwhelming challenge for the UN in the next decades will be coordinating international responses to climate change.
Equally challenging, finding ways to balance power among its strongest members, so they will continue to cooperate and not paralyze the organization's work.
The single greatest challenge to the UN is the rise of China, because China is gaining influence in the UN very rapidly as its economy grows, but that leaves American officials nervous, and it leaves diplomats from other countries worried that they are losing their positions and their influence in the UN system.
The organization, which has a multi-billion-dollar annual budget, is also facing the worst fiscal crisis in its history.
The UN is incredibly cash-strapped right now. And that has real-world consequences. It has programmatic consequences. It has consequences for peace and security. It has consequences for things like global health, as we see today.
As the UN looks ahead, it will need the unity and political will of its 193 member states to successfully tackle the many problems the world faces. Margaret Bashir, VOA News, New York.
In our entertainment segment, new music from legendary Malian singer Oumou Sangaré brings the art of live and unplugged performance center stage. It's not often that a musical artist records an entire album without amplifiers, overdubs, or headphones. But one singer from Mali has done just that. Heather Maxwell, host of Music Time in Africa, and Kwame Ofori have the story. Hi, Heather. Hi, Kwame.
Hello. Hi, Esther. Hey, Kwame.
Hey, Heather. Hi, Esther.
This week we have Song of the Week, and it is by a singer from Mali. Her name is Oumou Sangaré. The song is called Jukuru, which means in Bambara, support.
Let's get very string heavy, and it has a unique Malian sound. So with you having been to the region before, which instruments can you identify in there?
Well, you can see and hear that there is the acoustic guitar and then a uniquely Malian instrument. It's called the kamalengoni. It's the 6-string harp lute. And then there's just a keyboardist playing like keyboard pads. So the thing that makes that Malian sound unique is those string instruments and the way they play, their licks, the little melodies they play, but also the fact that the whole tuning is based on a pentatonic scale, which is 5 notes instead of 7.
Thanks, Heather and Kwame, for that wonderful music segment. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, have a great weekend.
you.